But anyway, the very next day, they were there when we got the news that they were going to have to cut him open again. They placed a stent, very small stent in his coronary artery to hold it up so he can have a second surgery in a couple of months. But the problem was he developed a blood clot around that stent, and he basically had a heart attack and a massive stroke. And on May 16th of 2009, in Denise's arms, he took his last breath. June 16th, May 16th, when he was born. But he took his last breath while she was holding him up, singing to him and tracing his eyebrow. And we had some more people from the church here right there with us in that room. Eric Saldana, George Cuff, and some other people. And it was right then in that hospital room, looking at my son's lifeless body, that I concluded that praying to be Christ-like is risky business. But you know what? It's risky business, but it's very rewarding. It's very rewarding because I knew God was going to answer my prayer. I just didn't know He was going to take my son's life. And I'm glad He did. And I'll tell you why. From that day on, okay, remember I was praying for compassion for lost people and opportunities to share the gospel on a greater scale. From that day on, people started asking me, how come your wife doesn't go crazy? How come you're still serving God after what He did to you? And my answer was all, our kids are in heaven. We have 3 kids. 2 of them are in heaven already, and we know we're going to see them again. Let me ask you about you. How about you? Where are you going when you die? That's the question. And then we started having opportunities to share Christ like never before. Denise, with the women. Even my daughter Julia, we heard the question about when is the proper age. Julia was 3 years old. And she is today the most committed evangelist that I know. She's 5 now. She tells everybody about her brother in heaven. Everybody. She goes around telling, and we were worried about her too, but she took it pretty well. And again, we weren't expecting, God ministered to us in such a way that, our daughter knows what the gospel is and how to get to heaven, and she'll tell you. And she tells, about Victor, how they're going to play again in heaven. So it was just, God broke my heart. And I praise God for what He did, because I wouldn't have it differently. Of course, if I would have known before, I would have chosen a different path. But I'm glad God decided to do that because of the results that I see now in our walk with Christ. We're growing closer together as a family, as a couple, and the opportunities to share Christ with others. I never asked to lead the evangelism ministry here. I was approached by George Cuff and Dr. Coombs, and they asked me to do it. I didn't sign up for it, so I clearly took that as God placing me in a different a sphere of ministry that I never dreamed before. Sure.
Can you translate?
I'm going to translate for you.
I can speak in English, but when I'm with the whole people, I get...
That's okay. Take your time.
Okay.
I get so nervous, so I'm going to speak Portuguese and he's going to translate.
Okay.
And eu só queria dizer pouco como é...
I want to tell you a little bit about
a resposta de Deus nas nossas orações.
God's answer in our prayers.
E muitas vezes não do jeito que a gente quer.
And many times not the way we're expecting Him to.
Mas Ele responde.
But He does answer our prayers.
Quando o Vitor eu estava indo várias vezes nos hospitais falando com os médicos.
When I was taking Victor to the hospital numerous times on a daily basis, talking to the doctors.
Uma noite eu pus
One night
eles para dormir, as 2 crianças.
I put him to go to sleep.
E eu fui para o meu quarto, pus o joelho no chão.
I went to my room and I knelt by his bed.
And orei.
And I started praying.
E pedi a Deus que eu sabia que Deus tinha o melhor para a vida dele.
And I knew God had the best plan for his life.
E que eu confiava no que Deus poderia fazer.
I trusted what God would do in his life.
Que eu sabia que tinha alguma coisa errada.
I knew something was wrong in his heart.
Mas que Deus pudesse abrir os olhos dos
God
médicos.
would open the eyes of the doctors to figure it out.
E naquele dia,
and on that day,
eu fiz propósito.
I made I decided to do something.
Ele tinha 1 ano e 1 semana.
He was 1 year, 13 months old.
No,
12 months old plus 1 week.
Porque eu tinha conversado com os médicos no Brasil, eu tenho
I had
família médica.
I have doctors in my family, so I had talked to them before,
E eles falaram que com 13 meses,
and they told me that at 13 months old,
ele deveria pelo menos estar de pé, com
he
força.
was supposed to be at least able to stand up.
E então eu pedi a Deus e falei, Deus, até ele fazer 13 meses,
So I asked God, until he's 13 months old,
eu vou estar jejuando.
I'm going to fast on a daily basis,
E que você me mostre
so that you will show me
o que ele tem.
what's wrong with him.
E então eu passei
So
todas essas 3 semanas.
So for 3 weeks I did that,
E ele morreu
and then he passed away right after that.
no dia que ele fez 13 meses.
To the day where he would be 13 months old.
E eu sabia naquele
And I
dia
knew that day
que Deus respondeu as minhas
that
orações.
God answered my prayers.
No dia que terminou o meu jejum,
And the day that I finished my
Fast.
purpose, my fast,
foi o dia que ele
it was the
morreu.
day that he died.
Era só isso que eu queria dividir.
I just want to share that with you.
Deus
God
responde as nossas
does answer our
orações,
prayers,
mas às vezes
but
de
sometimes
maneiras diferentes.
not in the way that we're expecting. And I just want to add that if you're praying for compassion or something like that, be aware that God will answer our prayers. And from the bottom of my heart, I hope He doesn't put any of you through something like this, but He will answer your prayers, and your life will be changed in a good way, in a good sense. You'll be more Christ-like because you'll be able to identify with His sufferings, and you'll be able to have a more compassionate heart. And we say this not just by experience. This is what the Bible says also, that if we're conformed daily to the image of the Son of God. So if you have been praying, or if you're going through something major, some major trial in your life, it may be that God is just answering your prayer or preparing you for a greater sphere of ministry. Just endure. It's time to enjoy the will of God, but there's also times that we endure the will of God. But the end result is a glorified Christ and a godly Christian. So that's our encouragement from our family to yours.
And one of the things that I see in you guys is just an eternal perspective the whole way through. It's like we're called to do that as Christians, but so many times we get caught up in living for this world, and a tragedy like that happens. We almost forget that Victor's in heaven and that we're going to see him again, and that, like you're saying, the important part is, okay, well, there's other people that don't know Christ that aren't going to be in heaven, and move us to action. But I have kind of I want to go back to the moment that this happened. Was it always, because not that it's easy, I know that it's not easy, but were you always kind of like, okay, it's God's will and let's move on? Like, what were those first days like? Like, how did you interpret? I mean, were you ever tempted to doubt things like that?
Especially me, I was so mad. Eu estava muito brava com Deus.
I was sort of angry with God, obviously.
E quando ele estava orando sobre
But when Pierre was praying about evangelism and compassion,
ele tinha marcado para ir para treinamento de evangelismo.
He was scheduled to go to a evangelism training.
E o treinamento era exatamente mês depois que ele morreu.
The training was exactly a month after Victor passed away.
E a gente estava pensando se ele ia, se não ia.
And we were still trying to decide whether or not I would go, if it would be better for me to stay.
Mas ele foi.
But I ended up going.
E quando ele voltou falando tudo era evangelismo, respirava evangelismo.
And when I'm going to do this in third person. When Pierre came back, everything was he was living and breathing evangelism. All he wanted to talk about was evangelism, eternal perspective.
E eu falei,
and
eu
I
não
said,
quero saber nada
I don't want to hear
disso.
about it.
Como que eu vou dividir
I said, how am I going to share the gospel
e falar do amor de Deus?
and talk about a loving God?
De Deus que levou meu filho.
And when he took my son.
E eu não conseguia pensar
But
nisso.
I couldn't even think about that.
Mas a gente aprendeu nesse tempo.
But we learned during this time
que todo mundo grieving diferente.
that everybody grieves differently.
E ele passou a orar por mim, mas me respeitar.
And Pierre started praying for me, but respecting my space.
E num dia à noite,
And one day at night,
quando
in the
ele
evening,
estava vendo umas fotos do
when
Victor,
Pierre was going through his Victor's pictures,
e começou a chorar
and he
muito.
started crying.
E ele me
weeping.
disse,
And he said,
Deus respondeu a minha oração.
God has answered my prayers.
Eu estava pedindo para ter,
I was asking God to give me compassion,
mas eu não sabia que ele ia
but I
tirar meu
didn't know
filho.
that he was going to take my son.
Hoje eu choro pela vida do meu
Today I
filho,
cry for my son's life,
mas eu posso imaginar
but I can imagine
como Deus se sente
how God's heart is
quando alguém morre
when somebody dies
e não tem a vida
and
eterna.
doesn't go to heaven.
Só nesse dia,
Only on that day,
Deus começou a mudar a
that
minha
God started working in my heart
vida e na vida de eternidade.
and started giving me a eternal perspective.
That's great. I remember reading that in your testimony. Do you remember that quote that really
Yeah.
changed your life? What was
Yeah,
that?
Steve, what's his name? Steve Saint, the son of Nate Saint, the martyred missionary. He had a daughter that passed away at 14, like with a brain tumor. And when I was listening to a testimony from him that changed my whole perspective too. He said something like that. He said, God broke my heart by taking my daughter away in his case, but I can only imagine, and I'm heartbroken, but I can only imagine what God must feel for people who go into eternity without Christ. So that changed his whole perspective, and when I heard that from him, it changed my whole perspective as well. So now, when many ask me what I do for a living, I get paid to share Christ with other people. It doesn't get any better than this. I would do it for free. Don't tell anybody. But I mean, it doesn't get any better. We go out every Wednesday now. We share Christ with the people who check the box here in the church, indicating they want information on church membership or baptism or how to become a Christian. I mean, I'm now enjoying the will of God.